Welcome everyone to another Design Ops Aligned podcast. I am welcomed by a very special guest by the name of Jeremy Dodd. Jeremy actually works for Atlassian. We're allowed to mention that because it's on his LinkedIn. Is that all right? We can keep that in, or should I edit that one? Okay,
No,
cool.
that works. Yeah.
And I brought on Jeremy because he is a content writer. And before he goes in, I believe that content writers are essential to the design team, and I wanted to get him on the show to give his 2 cents about this and how challenging content writing is with working with designers, and would love to get his views and opinions. Actually working for a company like Atlassian must be such a challenging thing, so I'm looking forward to his insights that he brings today.
Yeah, thanks, Awesome. I'm excited to be here and represent all content designers.
Yeah,
We're a quirky bunch, so it's fun to be here with you today and to talk more about what we do and maybe even some of the value that we can bring to design teams.
I'm going to dive in straight with that question. You just hit the nail on the head. I think content writers. All right, let me rephrase this in a better way. I think a lot of people nowadays, especially designers and especially researchers, there's a lot of talk about return of investment or the business value in design and the business value in research. Now, I'm going to go straight in with a kill with this question. How do you show the return of investment or the value in content writing?
Yeah, you are going right at it from the
And
get.
go.
So it's I like to think of it that you know it when you see it, and a good content designer will be able to show that value with his or her immediate team very quickly, but that doesn't always satisfy the powers that be. And so we do need to quantify the work that we do. And one of the easiest ways that I try to do that when showing the benefit or the change that we've brought to a specific user experience is, what's the user satisfaction before and after we've implemented a change? In something like search, are there more abandoned clicks? Do people just kind of stop and go away and not come back? I'm also, in my current role, one of the metrics that I'm working hard to implement, because I've seen it be successful, not just for content designers, but for AI experiences in general, is the concept of successful session rate. And what's cool about that is it's able to get at a qualitative, positive engagement. So things that don't necessarily show up quantitatively. So like a good example would be in a conversational agent. So like you could have a 15-minute conversation in which you're trying to figure out a fact, and also have a 15-minute conversation when you're just sparring different ideas. And to the outside observer, they would look very similar. But if you're spending 15 minutes trying to get a simple fact, that's not a successful session. If you're spending 15 minutes talking to an agent to try and kind of figure out your own thinking on something, that's a very successful session. I mean, if you spent 15 minutes talking to AI, we love that. And there are ways of, implementing that, not just with conversational agents, but in UX flows in general. So I think, to just sort of summarize, you have to have the right metrics in place. That does a lot to justify what's going on, or to justify the impact of a content designer. But then you have more like the quantitative stuff, which I think many people are familiar with, and I sort of touched on really briefly here. And then the last aspect of this question, which I think is probably the most important at the moment, is content designers aren't only working on UX engagement and design experiences. We have a huge role to play when it comes to AI and how we adjust the personality and the tone and the language that these models use. And as experiences get more personalized and modular, how do we make sure that we're still speaking to the right person in a relevant way? And so I think now more than ever, not only is content design important, but it is becoming easier and easier to measure because a successful AI experience has compelling content, and that's our job.
Absolutely. And, it ties into the conversation that we initially had when we first met, and why I wanted to bring you on the show. I think, and this is just from my experience. I can't speak for everyone, but generally what I find in my time of working with content writers was they would only be brought in after the design team would do something. And I think that's a bad practice. I really think that's, when I've seen that happen, it was a very, very bad practice because, designer would do something and then the content writer would have to squeeze it in whatever retail space was available. Now, this is happening still today. What would you say to people to advocate when's the right time to bring content writers in the design process?
Well, I think the earlier, the better. I think, a good content designer. So if you're a designer, and you have access to a content designer or a UX writer on your team, you really get the benefit of, having a second brain on the project, but not just a second designer brain, a brain that works a little bit differently than yours does and can see things that you may not. One of the gifts, I think, of being a content designer and just a writer in general. So I spent a couple years, I wrote some screenplays and got some traction in Hollywood and really learned like really good storytelling techniques and then how to get points across using only a few words. Screenplays are all about economy of language. But one of the things you see as a writer that maybe designers don't is the emotional through line of an experience and the core flow. You don't have to be burdened by, what an engineer has to do, which is connect the pipes and make sure things work. And you don't have to be burdened by the way things look and whether or not they're intuitive. You get to focus on what the person who's going through the experience is experiencing when they're going through the experience. And I have found that can be a really good grounding point of view in a design process, because when things get complicated and you're stuck in the weeds, good content designers have a way of bringing the team back to like the core issue at hand. Also, I think, maybe this is kind of a hybrid of the first question you asked and the one that we're talking about now, but one of the ways a content designer can show value is by not recommending words the first time that they're asked to solve a problem. And the reason that I've become a big fan of that is it forces people to see you in a different light. And also it gives you an opportunity as a writer to suggest something that other people on the team hadn't considered and may actually be the root cause of a problem that the team is facing, not just what a button reads or what an error message is.
See, it's always, and you I love that word that you just mentioned. What did you say? Is economy of words?
Economy of words. Yeah. So it's brevity. Being brief. Yeah.
Yeah. That's such an amazing statement, because I think the economy of words really is something that designers have to work with. Character count limits, spacing, etc., retail space. And as you mentioned, like bringing a content writer in early really, really benefits the design process. Now, one thing I've always struggled to understand is how do you test and verify content? And my kind of question is really figuring, or let me take it two steps back, actually. One of the things I see that's challenging during the design process with content writers is to validate the content or to test the content. How do you do this? I mean, what are the different methodologies you use in order to validate and test content?
Gosh, there's a lot. So there's a lot of tools out there that can help you get really helpful feedback on different directions that you can take a certain experience based on the type of content that you're showing. One, probably the quickest, and helps in quite a few cases, is just A/B testing. And you can, like, people they do very involved A/B testing, and that certainly has merit and is important, and I'm a full supporter of that. But also just casual or informal A/B testing where you show people two images of slightly different things and just getting like a positive or negative sentiment read on something like that, that can be really helpful on things like error messages or button text. Really, really small pieces of copy can be super helpful in that way. At least to unblock you and to test a variety of ideas very quickly and easily. And then when you consider like more involved pieces of content, so like, I don't know about other content designers, but I get brought into a lot of marketing motions and branding exercises, and in addition to just, or not just, but in addition to UX and writing and stuff like that. And I also have a background in advertising, which is why that happens, and a background that I find helpful in these situations, because what you realize a lot of times, and we'll get to how to test this in a second, but like, is that when you're writing something, you may not be trying to get the idea across that you think you are. And an example of that would be, in sales, like if you're trying to sell a car, you're selling freedom. If you're trying to sell a vacation, you're trying to sell memories. If you're okay, so you understand, you kind of understand the point.
Yeah, it's like the psychological.
So when you get into that, like, what is the message? There are a lot of different strategies that you want to test to figure out what the most persuasive approach is to getting the person to do the thing that you want to do. And so in those situations, you can also A/B test different messages. But I find it most useful to put that in the hands of a researcher, because they're able to present ideas in unbiased ways and get results. That's sort of like, you can't help but have your own opinion and biases when you write all these things, and you kind of want one to win or over the others. And so it's good to have a third party sort of be able to run the experiment for you, so that you're not going to win and get your way every time, whether you realize it or not. So in terms of, testing, there's a lot of resources out there. I don't know if I necessarily would plug a particular one, but in the States we have user testing, user voice. Those are great services, and you'd be as surprised at the fidelity of research and feedback that you can get for what a couple of years ago would have been a very expensive study to run.
This is where I wanted to highlight really the challenges content writers, because a lot of designers, and I would say even researchers, don't know the level of effort that content writers go into. I know this because I've been working with content writers for so many years. And one of the things I always see that's challenging is, and designers use this as well. We use like a semantic differential. How does a company position its brand? And that also ties in directly to tone of voice. Now, tone of voice is then given to a content writer, and they have to then use that tone of voice and that brand identity and put their own spin in it. And I want you to just talk through that process, the kind of level of effort that goes into it, so people really understand what content writers go through.
Yeah, I mean, at times it's almost like you have different personalities living in your head at the same time. And especially when you're talking about brand, content guidelines and voice and tone and stuff like that. It actually, like, that is it for me. I think of, the different brands or companies that I've worked for as characters, as if I'm writing a screenplay, and the best strings or lines or words that I've come up with, it's not because I've been staring at my computer and pounding my head against the wall. It's because that character spoke to me. And I know this is really, kind of sounds far out a little bit, but it's not unlike an artist, and I make that comparison fully aware of the fact that being a full-time writer or a painter or something like that is separate from working at a company. So I'm not saying that all content writers are artists, but there is a degree of artistry in what we do. And when you have a good sense of who that character is, the brand, the company that you're working for, it's like you hear it. It comes from somewhere else. And you're just the person that's writing it down. And in fact, I just did this because I recently joined the company that I'm at now. And I read over the style guide and I read the brand guidelines. And as I'm reading it, I'm picturing like what this company's face looks like and how this person talks and if they get along with their parents and, you know, like what the backstory is, so that I have those tools to call on if I'm in an interesting situation and I have to think like, so what would somebody who went through a traumatic life experience at a young age and maybe bonded close to their mother, more to their mother than their father, like how does that person address an error message and like what kind of language would they use? And the cool thing about that is it helps you break out of the simple, straightforward, obvious solution and helps you get into, you know, maybe different ways of thinking about it or solving it in a novel way that actually can turn something bad into a positive experience for the user.
Wow. You just went like 2 levels deep because I didn't know content writers like think like that. And I can imagine most of the people in this industry think like you in the sense of you're writing for a character and you're writing for that kind of description to describe how that character will speak. And that's amazing. And that's why I really wanted to get somebody like yourself on the show. I think, you know, you are the missing piece in the design team. Everyone just thinks about UX designers or UI designers, but, you know, the content writers are kind of the unloved, I would say, the unloved hero in the in the whole process.
You know, that's just, I think that's the plight of any kind of writer, to be honest. We're always the first in and the first forgotten, I think, in a lot of situations. People just kind of take it for granted. So you have to be comfortable with that as a UX writer for sure. And then also be comfortable with knowing how and when to toot your own horn and letting people know that you did add value. That's hard for a lot of writers because we tend to be introverted and quiet and we want to share credit and stuff like that. But you can't always be that way in life and at work. You gotta take yourself out of your comfort zone for sure.
I think I want to highlight another thing about, and that's just my opinion about your position. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong. Some people who come into this field of content writing or UX content writing, I'm going to use that term, that job title, UX content writing, is that they're thinking that they're going to be doing a lot of work in the UI or in the UX. What I tend to see is that I would say about 20% of that work is in the UX and 80% is in legal documentation. What's your thoughts about this?
Let's see. So you said 20% UX, 80% in documentation?
Well, I would say 80% in that legal side of the business, like writing terms and conditions that make sense, writing instructions that make sense, you know, so they don't really do that UX writing bit in the design. It's mainly how can we show these policy privacy and, you know, those type of legal documentation that makes sense to users.
Yeah. So I'll give you here's my personal experience with that. Yes, that is a huge aspect of what a lot of content designers do. I personally advocate for using AI in a lot of those situations. Like I think you can take a rough outline of help documentation or support documentation and just with a couple turns of a conversation, get something that's nice and usable and fresh. And I know as a content designer, that kind of work can be a little soul sucking. It's tough. It doesn't really pull on, you know, the creative skills that we have. And so I'm all for offloading as much of that as is reasonable to AI. Now, personally, I consider myself to be pretty fortunate. So prior to the company I was at now, I was at a very large tech company working in a space where we were flighting, you know, 10,000 different experiences at a time to get feedback. And you just can't have documentation for all of those things. So we had a very minimal documentation. It was also a pretty intuitive product, and it was in an industry that people had well-developed mental models, so we didn't have to explain a lot. But for me personally, that has been, that ratio hasn't been the case. I've been, if anything, 95% UX, and then a small percentage of my time is dedicated towards the document work. But yeah, like I will also shamelessly plug something that I would love other content, not just content designers, but designers as well. So we talked about brand guidelines and voice and tone, and a lot of companies have those. Those will be pages on their website, or there'll be an internal style guide that you can use and reference. For sure, upload that into your conversational AI of choice. Create your own GPT if you use OpenAI, and let that be your character to a certain extent, that you can ask for questions like, how would you say this based on those documents that you've uploaded? I have found that it rarely actually gives you the exact right answer right out of the gate, but it definitely can generate a bunch of good options. And from there, you're much closer to getting to the finish line than if you had done all of that on your own, all that ideation just on your own. So definitely use the tools for documentation.
Yeah.
And anything else.
Wow. That's some really, really good advice. Amazing.
Yeah.
I really like that.
I mean, and designers can have that. Like I said that I rarely give, kind of feedback on individual strings when we first meet. I mean, one of the things I think is a useful tool for designers as well, is if they have their own GPT with all those things uploaded, and they can kind of query it and at least get something initial out there. I find it helps you think a little bit like a content designer, or at least, if not a content designer, a little bit outside your own perspective, to help find solutions that you might not have otherwise considered.
Enjoying the content? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for more updates. Your support helps us bring you even more great content. Now let's get back to our podcast.
I'm going to take a spin on a different question. Now, you don't have to answer it, but I have seen a lot of companies use AI at the moment, and it's not the reason I actually brought you on the show. It just happened recently, to be honest. The reason why I say I'm bringing up this topic, I've seen a lot of companies try to adopt AI, and it's failed. Or my general feeling is that when we've done user research, people don't trust it at the moment. Now, the only company that I have seen this perform the best, and I'm talking, I was absolutely blown away with it, was Atlassian and Jira and Confluence. And I'll give you an example. You probably know it, and I can show you a screenshot if I have it. I don't know if I'm able to share it. I'm gonna have to speak to legal. Yeah. But I'll just give you the context.
I'm pretty familiar with their products, so
okay, yeah. So I was writing my epic, and then wrote the description, wrote the acceptance criteria, and then I was just about to make a user story, and then they positioned this button in the most cleverest way. It was just next to the plus button where you add the user story, and it said suggested tasks. That's all it said. And I literally clicked the button, and then the AI worked, and it literally created a whole bunch of stories for me with description. Yeah, just with description, no acceptance criteria. And then when I went into that story, I clicked again the AI, and it was creating a whole bunch of subtasks. Now, I personally would not have seen that button if it wasn't for the content. That's my 2 cents. And secondly, how it positioned the AI. It didn't position the AI like, hey, we're going to write this for you. It caught me while I was in my workflow. Yeah. And so I wanted to get your 2 cents on that. I wanted to get your 2 cents on 2 things. One, how you've positioned, or you can, if you can speak on that behalf. And 2, the content that was used. Do you know if you know anything about this?
Yeah. So I do. I'm curious. So do you remember in that instance if you clicked on a contextual button, so it said create user stories or something like that, or you clicked on a catch-all AI button in that moment? Do you remember?
I actually remember it's just a normal create user story button. So it's like a button because I use the cloud platform. So it's
Okay.
just literally
Okay.
a button located underneath the title. I hit that button, which I normally do to create user stories, and then that's when it caught me. And yeah, I'm just curious how this came about.
Well, hey, I'm glad you found value in that and were able to get through something that I understand could be quite a slog, but very important, I think, to what you were going through and for all teams to be aligned on what the key user stories are in a when working on a project is, that's huge.
Yes.
So at a I don't know if I want to speak. So here's what I think works, and here's why I think a lot of here's where, let me see if I can frame this question right. So my answer, a useful way to think about how to surface AI capabilities within a user experience kind of comes down to like different layers of interaction. And this is one of the projects that I just recently completed. Within a UI, you sort of have like a global layer of navigation, and that's kind of typically at the top where you're switching between, not just different points in your app, but maybe even different apps at once, or you have a global search bar or something like that. And in that integration layer or interaction layer rather, those should be pretty static. So if you have any AI functionality, you would put it up there, but those buttons don't change. They're the same in that user experience that they would be across any other app. And so that's so that you can create some discoverability, and just help users get familiar with where they can find certain tools at different times. The second interaction layer is kind of like the midpoint between the global and maybe the more granular area. And I think of it as like the toolbar or the ribbon. So
Yeah.
if you want to execute a command over a page of content, then you use that toolbar and ribbon. And in there, you can be a little smart. You can use context. You can use contextual awareness to maybe dynamically suggest through a button label what the user's trying to do, like create user stories or something like that. And then that last interaction layer is really like almost like the most atomic level. So that's where the user's trying to write a ticket or create a page in Confluence or any sort of like content that's words and images. And there, I think you can be extremely contextual because we have pretty good idea using machine learning what users at that certain moment are trying to do across, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of users. So in summary, the further you are away from content generation, the more static the AI options should be. The closer you get to actual content creation or consumption, the more dynamic your AI options can be.
Wow.
And that way you naturally have a nice balance between discoverability and showing people what you can do with retention by showing them not just that there is, umbrella AI capabilities, but there are specific tools under that umbrella that you can utilize at different points in your journey, whatever you're trying to do. And it surfaces it in a seamless, helpful, contextually relevant way. So it's really good discoverability and retention when you break it down into the different interaction layers.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. You just hit a hierarchy or an information architecture, which a lot of businesses are not seeing. They're just throwing it on the top, and it's like, you're throwing paint on the wall and expecting it to stick. It's like, that's the kind of mentality that's what's happening. But I think what you've just mentioned, you've investigated the architecture of a page layout and position the right things in the right places. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and I think it's been a good solution for the moment, but it also sets up it sets you up for future success, because the moment that we're in right now, people are asking for AI tools and they want to know, where's that story creator, user story creator AI feature. And so it's helpful to surface that in the moment and when they're trying to meet them where they're at when you can. But this AI moment isn't going to last forever. Like, we don't go on the internet and have a website that's, brought to you by HTML. I don't know that we're going to have to call AI out forever. We're just going to call them tools, not necessarily AI tools. And so if we get that, we can be proactive in helpful ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be with all the AI tools. It can be just tools in general.
Yeah. Well, then let me take a stab at this, because you just mentioned, and I think you mentioned in the beginning, the industry has shifted. It is around content, about prompting, about using the right language. And you can see now that a lot of, how should you say, prompting is even going into designing, where people can prompt stuff and you can build a full-fledged website. Now, and obviously I know you can't speak for everything, but where do you think the industry is going with this whole content generation?
I've recently become a convert of agents. So before, people would talk to me about agents and my eyes would just sort of gloss over or I don't know. I'd just start thinking something else and waiting for them to stop talking. And then, but then I've seen the light, and what I think we can expect in the next 4, 5, 6 months is agents to become a bigger part of the AI conversation. And here's why. So when you think of these large language models, they're kind of good for just having a source of general intelligence for you to tap into from time to time and get quick answers, specific answers, or even bat around various ideas. But what you really want is like a team of various experts that can provide their point of view based on their subject matter expertise. And that's what agents are in large degree. So if you think, let's just take your OpenAI, your ChatGPT, your Claude, whatever your model of choice is, and you create a little prompt for yourself that says, you are a researcher with 20 years experience in human behavior and cognitive, whatever. You have a PhD in economics from London School of Economics. You were a design professor for 20 years. So you create all of those, what are essentially agents within your system prompt. And then you can go to GPT and say, like, hey, I'd like for you to do some research on this problem, what I'm having. Run it by your PhD in behavioral science to come up with ideas that I can then filter through this design problem that I'm working on. And what you've essentially created various agents that are experts in their field that this general model can then go to for specific tasks. And you've created what is now what OpenAI just recently released, which is that O1 preview. You've created a framework for that agent to go back to go to the individual agents and get the best answer from the right agent for the problem that you have. And instead of doing its best to play that part as a generalist, it can tap into specific knowledge wells of expertise. So that's kind of like one big picture example, but you can imagine how companies that have a large amount of customer data and then also have clients who store their data, maybe not on their platform, but on Google Drive or SharePoint or something like that. And once you get all of those systems working together, creating specialized agents that can perform tasks across the organization, across all the knowledge, across the conversations, I think we're going to be seeing some pretty phenomenal transformations happening at a lot of companies, not just tech companies.
Wow. You just opened my mind into many, many things. I wish I could ask you more about this, but this is where I think content writers are going to excel in the industry. And that's my personal opinion. I personally believe anyone who's been in the content industry or content writing industry are the ones who are going to benefit from this technology, because it's, as you mentioned, you're building the agent. You have to describe the agent. It all comes down to written. What's your thoughts about this?
I couldn't agree more. And the anecdotal data point I would add to that is, I think, the moment right now, the job market can be really challenging for a lot of people, and there's just a lot of uncertainty at the economic level, and so I think that plus a lot of the unknowns that are created by AI and how it's going to evolve over the year, it's made companies a little hesitant to hire, particularly in functions like design. However, I have noticed that I don't want to speak an untruth for somebody else's experience, but
yeah,
content design is perhaps like a special exception to that, because I have seen like the percentage of content design jobs that are out there has increased, and I know that because LinkedIn will tell me in general, because I have a search query on that. Mm-hmm. But not just the overall jobs, but the level. So like there's a lot of like VP of content design, head of content transformation, and that shows me that companies in large are recognizing that the value of having a good content designer to partner with a great engineering leader and a great design leader and a great PM leader, because more and more of these experiences, as they become more personalized, they're going to need someone that can really finesse content and understand how to make all the things that people are working on like really come alive to users. Yeah.
Oh, I think I chose the wrong industry. I need to go back to school, because before I wrap up the show, because we're coming up to the end, I think one of the key things, I'm going to do some product placement here. So,
do it.
Well, I think one of the key things I'm trying to emphasize whenever we go into consultants, let me rephrase it in a better way. I think one of the key things I'm trying to emphasize in any design teams who do have content writers, and most don't. I mean, around Europe, we tend to outsource most of the content, but if you do have the opportunity to have a content writer in your company, you can learn so much from them. And we always tend to go into our new clients and ask them, do they have that infrastructure? And if they do, we really bring them together. And we see the benefits of bringing those teams very, very close. So, I'll advocate anyone who's listening to this who do have content writers and listen to Jeremy, they can bring such a wealth of knowledge to the table. And Jeremy, I wanted to get your 2 cents on this. What advice would you give to people who are coming into this industry as beginner content writers and people who are established now? What advice would you give to them as well right now?
I guess, okay, so two things, and maybe they're the same thing. We'll see. So there's a book I read. It's Stephen King on writing, and I mean it's just a good book to, like, if you're an okay writer, it can make you a good writer. I don't know that'll make you a great writer, but it will make you an okay writer good. And one of the things that that he talks about is how writing is momentum, and that it's not, you don't always sit down in front of your computer and create great prose, but if you create that habit and the muscle memory, then you're able to call upon your writing more consistently. And I think that that's true, not just in writing, but like in careers in general. And the stuff that you do can become the stuff that you rely on at a later time. I remember a long time ago, I read a book on Photoshop and learned how to use Photoshop. And I swear, just that one book, like I coasted off that for 10 years because I could mock up my ideas way more effectively, even if they were inferior ideas, than other people. And I had no idea at the time that I would be able to lean onto that Photoshop, those Photoshop skills the way that I did. I just thought it was interesting in the moment, and it became something that was very valuable. And good, knowledge accrues and compounds. And so no matter what you're doing, if you throw yourself into it, you'd be surprised, especially if you're early in career, when you get to the other side of that bridge and you've been in the career for a while, like how valuable some of those early learnings were to you, even if at the time it was like pulling teeth. And then the other thing that I would say that I have learned, and people who go to meetings with me can see this, because after we talk about possibilities and idea, like after a while, it's like the blood rushes from my face. I turn it, and that's because like I have seen how important execution is. Like to me, execution really is everything. And so talking about all the different ways of doing things, or we could do this, or we could do that. Like once you kind of feel generally good, go for it. And go hard. Stay out of that indecisionville. My favorite book to recommend to people is The Places We'll Go by Dr. Seuss. Because it summarizes the emotional experience of starting a new career or starting a new anything, and really like the danger of being idle. And it does it in a very, Dr. Seussian way, which is great. And so, yeah, momentum, just keep at it. Little bits compounds over time. And then if you find yourself being idle or inactive, just pick a direction and go. And the learning that you'll get from that activity will far outweigh the losses that you may have suffered from not doing anything.
That is some amazing advice there. Thanks, man. I can't dissect that because everything you just mentioned is such a perfect way for people who are coming into this field. Don't be scared. I think how I took that is you have to try, you have to fail, you have to learn, you have to really, really learn in the content field. But yeah, don't stay idle. I like that one. I'm going to steal that one from you. So
yeah, well, the quote, I actually heard this the other day, which is, there are no right decisions. You make decisions right.
Love that. Absolutely love that. That's brilliant. That is absolutely brilliant.
Right on.
Jeremy, I would love for people to get in touch with you. People who watch this podcast to really reach out and ask you questions and really connect with you, because I think you bring such a wealth of knowledge and you bring so much to the table in this field. And I think I would love anyone who is listening that has any questions to reach out to Jeremy. His link will be in our podcast bio. Jeremy, is there anything you want to leave off before we wrap up?
No, I just want to give you a big shout out and thanks as well. It's great to come on to venues like this and talk about content design, and for just a moment, kind of understand what it's like to be an actual designer, where all the attention is on you and you get all the credit. We need that every once in a while, so I appreciate it.
No, as mentioned, I think the limelight is always on the design, it's always on that UI thing. And I think, that is just one combination. And I think content writing and the whole conglomerate, we believe, I'm talking about the design ops consultancy, we believe a good team consists of content writers, UI designers, UX designers, researchers, and a behavioral science person. And if you bring that squad to any team, if you bring that squad to any company, you can have a magic,
Yeah.
And if you don't have a content writer, I think it will fall apart, because you need content writer in my opinion. So
Here. Well said. Couldn't say it better myself.
Nice one. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much. And, we're definitely looking forward to having you back on the shows.
Great. It would be my pleasure. Take care. Thank you.